All right, welcome. Today, we're putting on our detective hats. We're going to dive deep into the 7th century and look at the actual hard evidence, or maybe the lack of it, for the origins of Islam. Now, this isn't about challenging anyone's faith, not at all. It's about asking, what do the historical records, the archaeology, what do the manuscripts themselves actually tell us about this incredible moment in history? So, it all boils down to this one big question. What can we actually know from the 7th century itself? We're not looking at stories written hundreds of years later. We're talking about the stuff from the time, the coins, the rock inscriptions, records from other empires. What can we say for sure based only on the evidence that has managed to survive? That's our mission today. Okay, so the traditional story, what scholars call the standard Islamic narrative, is kind of like a three-legged stool. You've got three essential pillars holding the whole thing up. The man, that's the Prophet Muhammad, the place, the city of Mecca, and the book, the Quran. And, with a three-legged stool, all three legs have to be solid, right? If just one of them is wobbly from a historical perspective, scholars say the whole structure could tip over. So let's go ahead and test just how sturdy these pillars really are. So here's the game plan for this explainer. First, we've got to talk about this massive challenge that historians face, a huge gap in the evidence. Then we'll take on each of those three pillars one by one, the man, the place, and the book, and see what the record says. And finally, we'll zoom out and ask, okay, what does all of this really mean when we think about history versus faith?
For any historian, the first thing you do is look for eyewitness accounts, right? Contemporary sources. But with the origins of Islam, you hit a wall, a big one. For almost 200 years after the prophet is said to have lived, the historical record is just quiet. It's shockingly silent about all the details we now take for granted. Scholars call this the evidence gap, and it's a huge problem. And this timeline, man, it just lays it all out there, see? All the action is supposed to be happening here, in the 7th century. But look at when the actual biographies, the Sirah, and the collections of sayings, the Hadith, were written down way over here in the 9th and 10th centuries. The people writing this stuff weren't eyewitnesses. They weren't even their kids or their grandkids. They were born centuries after the events they were describing.
Yeah, just let that number sink in for a second. 200 to 300 years. That's like if I decided to write the very first detailed biography of, say, George Washington. But I'm doing it today, and I have zero documents from his time, just based on stories that have been passed down for 10 generations. I mean, how accurate could that possibly be? And that's the critical takeaway here. We have no contemporary biographies of Muhammad from the place and time he was supposedly living. And it's not just a time gap, it's a distance gap. I mean, look at this. The folks writing all this down, they were in Baghdad, Basra, Bukhara. That's 1,000, even over 2,000 miles away from Mecca. And here's the kicker. They were all writing during the Abbasid Caliphate, an empire that didn't even exist until more than a century after the fact. So historians have to ask the hard question. Was this story being written to fit the political needs of a brand new empire? Okay, so with all that context, let's tackle pillar number 1, the man. And to do that, historically speaking, we don't start with the name Muhammad. No, we start with just 4 consonants. M-H-M-D. Now, this slide gets right to the heart of the matter for linguists. See, early Arabic script had no vowels. None, just consonants. The vowels we see today were added way, way later. So what does that mean? It means when an archaeologist finds MHMD carved on a rock from the 7th century, we actually have no idea if it was pronounced Muhammad. Those 4 letters could have been said a bunch of different ways. And this is where it gets really interesting. MHMD isn't just a possible name. It's actually a title. It means the praised one, or the blessed one, or the anointed one. And that, for a historian, is a game changer. It raises this huge question. When these early inscriptions and coins say MHMD, are they talking about a guy named Muhammad, or are they using a title for some kind of messiah figure? And it turns out, this wasn't a new thing. Not at all. This title, MHMD, has a long history before Islam. You can find a version of it in the Hebrew Bible. You find Christian writers in the 4th century using it as a title for Jesus. A Jewish inscription from the 6th century uses it to mean anointed one. So the point is, by the time the 7th century rolls around, MHMD is already this well-known title that both Jews and Christians were using to talk about a Messiah. All right, let's move on to pillar number 2, the place.
The traditional story we all know says Mecca was this huge, bustling hub for trade and religion back in the 7th century. But when historians and archaeologists go looking for it, well, they have a really, really hard time finding it.
So let's start with the basics, maps. Historians have dozens of really detailed maps of Arabia from Greek and Roman geographers, made both before and during the 7th century. And you know what's missing? Mecca. It's just not there. It doesn't start showing up on maps until more than 100 years later.
Okay, so what about trade? The story is that Mecca was this crucial crossroads for international trade, right? The problem is, when you look at the actual trade records from the big empires of the day, the documents listing all the important cities, ports, and caravan routes, Mecca is, again, completely missing. It's just not mentioned. And that brings us to the ground itself, the archaeology. You'd expect a big city to leave a big footprint, right? Layers of buildings, pottery, that sort of thing. But archaeologists just haven't found any solid evidence of a major city in Mecca that dates back to the 7th century. So you put it all together, no maps, no trade records, no archaeology, and from a purely historical viewpoint, this pillar starts to look pretty shaky. Okay, on to our third and final pillar, the book. And we're not just talking about the Quran here. We're talking about the whole library that supports the traditional story, the Sirah, which are the biographies of the Prophet, and the Hadith, the big collections of his sayings. And you guessed it, we run into another massive problem with the evidence, a huge gap in the manuscripts. This chart really spells it out. Take a look at the most important collections of the Prophet's sayings, the Hadith. They were supposedly put together in the 9th century. But the oldest, complete copies of these books that we have physically in our hands today, they're from the 14th or 15th centuries. That's a 500 or 600-year gap. Think about that. That's an enormous game of telephone over centuries.
So let's get this straight. The people who compiled the books were writing centuries after the events. And then the oldest copies we have of their books were written centuries after they died. The chain of evidence is broken, not once, but multiple times. As one analysis from our source material puts it pretty bluntly.
And here's one last little detail that might surprise you. The standard biography of Muhammad that's used all over the world today, the Sirah of Ibn Hisham, it was actually put together in its current form in the 1850s by a German linguist. He traveled around Europe, found all these different scattered manuscript fragments, and pieced them together into the book we now know. Okay, we've looked at the evidence gap. We've looked at the man, the place, and the book. So after all of that, from a strictly historical perspective, where does that leave us? What's the takeaway here?
So let's just do a quick recap of the 3 pillars. For the man, we saw that MHMD was an existing title, not just a name. For the place, we saw that Mecca doesn't show up in 7th century maps, trade records, or archaeology. And for the book, we found these huge, centuries-long gaps in the manuscript evidence.
So what this all means, from an academic and historical standpoint, is that the standard Islamic narrative can't be proven using the normal tools of history. There's just not enough contemporary evidence from the 7th century to back it up. The core claims are, for a historian, unverifiable. And when history can't give you proof, the whole foundation has to shift from objective evidence to, well, to faith. Look, at the end of the day, this kind of historical investigation isn't about proving or disproving a religion. It's really about showing the limits of history. It makes us think really hard about the difference between something you can verify with evidence and something you accept on faith. And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. When history is silent, what does faith hear?